Good morning. My name is Greg Suddy. This is Study on Soccer. I'm here with Craig Rhodis. Craig Rhodis is the technical director for the World Mini Football United States national team. And we're going to get started here in just a second. First off, let me do a little bit of advert for Auden Technologies. Auden Technologies will take care of everything from your security cameras to alarm systems, all the way up to servers and networks. They operate primarily out of the Midwest and the Northeast. You can contact Auden Technologies at INFILLC, that's NFILLC.com, or you can email them at jauden@NFILLC.com. Thank you very much for Auden Technologies and their sponsorship. Hi, Craig. It's very good to see you today, man. Thanks for joining me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's sort of get started where it all started. Where you grew up, how you got involved in the game of soccer in the first place. Talk about your playing career, and let's get to know Mr. Craig Rhodis.
Well, I grew up just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, and I think my first professional experience was back in what back then was the MLS. It was called the USISL, and they had a team in Cincinnati. And very younger compared to the rest, and got an opportunity and took advantage. I was blessed enough with two of my very first professional indoor soccer teams to be coached by two fellas who were what I would consider legends, but were so good to me because at that point, I didn't really have the background. And the Cincinnati Silverbacks, back in the old NPSL,
Right.
were coached by George Fernandez.
Oh,
And
really?
Georgie was absolutely wonderful for me. In fact, I would say that I don't have a career without Georgie. I started off as a practice squad player.
Wow.
Within a short time, I was a regular player. By the time I was in the playoffs my first year, I was a regular line player, and I attribute a lot of that to Georgie. He wasn't just somebody that taught me the game. He was the first one that really taught me your relationships with the players make all the difference. Just so blessed to have him in my early career. And I can distinctly remember after my first year, him calling me in for my end of the season meeting and saying, "You're going to have a long career in this league." And I don't think even he realizes how much that meant to me. Left there, and probably 2 or 3 years shortly after that, I ended up in Portland, playing for the Portland Pythons. I don't remember if that was the CISL or the WISL or a combination of both at that point, but I was coached by Ralph Black, another legend, and
Wow.
had a little bit of a reputation as a crazy guy. But I got to tell you, the Ralph was so good to me. Would invite me to his house to watch film. It was my first experience with preparation away from the field and learning by video and talking through the game and just being a student of the game. Ralphie was wonderful for me.
Wow.
And just really blessed to have those kind of people in my early career to teach me. Also early in my career, I went to Lafayette, Louisiana. I was drafted by Lafayette, Louisiana in the old EISL, and again, not a real clear idea of what was going on, and I was bouncing. Back then, you could play indoor year round. You could go to the AISL or the WISL and then play in the MPSL. Right. They very quickly put a stop to that with your contracts, but for a while, a short period of time, we could do both. And I remember Bernie and I would do that, and ended up in Lafayette, Louisiana. And when I got drafted by Lafayette, Louisiana, of course, you're saying all these cities I could be in. Why am I in Lafayette, Louisiana? And it was absolutely wonderful. Two back-to-back championships, wonderful environment, huge crowds, and had the opportunity to play with guys like Troy Dososky, Todd Dososky, guys that at the time they were younger but became legends of the game. And
Right.
so at that point, I was able to actually learn from um, players, not just the coaches, but players. And
Sure.
got Bo Brown that ended up in Dallas for years.
Yeah.
Bo ended up playing with me in Utah for a while. Just players that became legends that just knew so much more than I did.
Right.
And I was also lucky enough on those 2 years to be captain of the team. And at
Mm,
that point, I learned kind of how to manage the lower end of the roster versus the guys that were obviously the best players, like a Troy and Todd. Because to be honest, I was always an average player, but I also knew that I was a player that had to do all the little things. And if I could do all the little things, then my team would win. And because my team did so well, there were some individual honors and awards at that point. But to be honest, the championship rings meant all the difference.
yeah.
So Greg, I was really really lucky in my playing career to play for and play with guys that just taught me quite a bit, not just on the field but off the field,
Right.
and I was able to carry that for a pretty long career. And then, like us all, an injury, a small injury becomes a major injury, and 18 knee surgeries later, I'm no longer playing, and I have to figure out how to transition into coaching.
Okay.
Um, but again, I would attribute all of those people to teaching me so much that I felt like the transition was relatively easy for me
Great.
into coaching.
Right. Well, as far as coaching goes, when you were a player, did you ever consider that to be something that you would end up eventually to do?
I think I always knew I was going to be a coach at some point. Funny story. I can remember when I was graduating high school and stood up in front of the church auditorium. They were honoring me for graduation, and I told them I wanted to be a tax attorney because at that point I really believed that's what I was going to do. So
Okay.
I kind of grew into the desire to coach. But I think as I was playing and just getting filled with all of the knowledge and passion for the game, I think I always knew that I was going to coach. I don't know that I don't know that I knew I was always going to gear myself towards small sided. Whether that's futsal or arena or mini football. I think that became
Right.
something that became a strength and an interest later in the career.
Well, coaching is a huge. I mean, a coach can be a huge asset to somebody's, as they're growing up and being molded as a player, and it makes a big difference. Those are people. If they're good coaches, those are people that youth or young player can then carry, into their memories forever. I mean, like what you're saying about George Fernandez and Ralph Black. I mean, and the impact that they have in your life, and now you're in a position to do the same thing yourself for young players and professionals, and making that impact for them yourself, and carry those lessons that you picked up from those people that impressed you and impressed upon you the nature of coaching. Now I'm aware that you coach uh, youth teams as well. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. And again, even with youth, I've geared myself recently over the last few years more towards the small sided stuff, especially futsal. We've
Right.
got a soccer school here in Cincinnati and had some success regionally and nationally with some of our futsal teams. And what I find is small sided is small sided. There are things that stick. Even in mini football, as I've become more experienced, the the ones that have the most success in transitioning from indoor soccer to mini football are the ones that have a futsal background. The spaces,
I was going to ask
without
you that.
without boards, all those kind of things, right?
Right.
So I find that it correlates. But recently, as I've been doing our coaching courses and things like that, what I also find is the educational piece on how small sided applies to 11v11. Um, there, for
Right.
example, everybody in outdoor soccer wants to counter press. And counter press, one of the basic tenets is one
Right.
plus three. One pressures the ball and three close the next pass. That's futsal. That's small sided.
Right.
So there's a lot of pieces that
Right.
that
Right.
apply. And I would say that I'm probably more in line with Keith in how futsal develops players, especially at a young
Got
age. I would even go a little
Right.
further and say that, in my opinion, it would not surprise me that 6 to 8 years from now, 25% of our full national team players, men's and women's, will have some sort of futsal background. So I might take it a little step further than Keith does.
Well, the game of futsal is an international game as well. I mean, the arena game is pretty much exclusive to the United States and some Mexico, with the boards. But so it's important for the players because I mean, there's a lot of transition back and forth, especially with World Mini Football. A lot of those players from the MASL and the MLIS and those guys that have an indoor arena background and professional contracts and careers are playing in the on the national team. And exhibitions here in the United States are done. And this is a question I've had. I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but um, the United States being the teams play indoors. The exhibition games, all those games that we've seen between the United States and Mexico, are played indoors. Is that a disadvantage when the teams actually get to the field, because the World Mini Football programs are international? There's a lot of players there's a lot of nations that play those things, that game with active leagues. Is there a disadvantage for the United States or North American players coming from the arena game?
Huge. And I would say that that's probably a common piece that people, when they talk about mini football and maybe in their opinion lack of success of our men's team in the mini football World Cups the last couple times, these European countries, they play a Champions League mini football. They play European
Right.
championships every single year mini football. And so,
Right.
just like if we had an arena World Cup, I would expect the U.S. to have a huge advantage because we do that on a regular basis. So it,
Right.
it, it is a leap, and truthfully, I would attribute that, like our women's team when we won the mini football World Cup in Ukraine. Competitively, we were just so much better than everybody else. This last World Cup in Croatia, the gap had closed considerably. And that's because,
Mhm.
not just because some of these women's federations are putting more money into their mini football programs, but they're playing more often. They have women's leagues, they have champions leagues, and so they're playing on a regular basis. And so they're able to close the gap considerably. And truthfully, if I'm being honest, it also affects our roster selection because the guys that I would say, or the women, but that are a really good fit for what we would call traditional arena or indoor soccer, and using the boards consistently as a strength of their game. That's a difficult transition for them because there are no boards, and so they have to somewhat recreate their game. And I think that's why you've seen a lot of the carryover between 6, 7 guys that are on our men's futsal national team, and they're also on our mini football national team.
Right.
Seba and Martiz, and all these guys that have become mainstays on our futsal team. Zach and Frank and all these guys. There's a carryover
Right.
into mini football because they do have a little different game that's maybe a little more applicable to mini football.
And as far as the skills that are coming out of the futsal, obviously there's no boards there, so that might be an even easier transition to the mini football format.
It is. I mean, obviously there's an extra player, and that has an effect because it changes the positional structure a little bit. Um, but I think the style of play that we want to play and the movements and the combinations, I think, are very similar. So yes, I would agree that it's certainly an easier transition.
So let's talk a little bit about just small-sided soccer. I mean, in general, small-sided soccer has really seemed to pick up. I mean, you could even include beach soccer in that conversation. The TST format, six aside, whether it's mini football or indoors, with the boards, futsal, it's really picked up here in the United States. People are more aware of it than they have been in the past, and I mean, I know that futsal tends to be, at least from my perspective, it tends to be more of a youth program. I we don't. I mean, I know that Keith was talking about putting together a professional futsal league. Has that actually taken place?
It has not. And
Right.
there are regional pop-up leagues for men's futsal and even women's futsal. And Drew Ducker and his crew in the Midwest have done a great job of trying to provide that opportunity. I again, talking about being blessed, I've been very blessed with our women's national team program. There's a core set of players that I think you know this, but I'm when I select a roster, it's a little different than maybe somebody else does, right or wrong. Lack of an ego, team
Mhm.
players don't care
Right.
about the stats, but also the personalities off the field. Are they passionate
Right.
about the game? Are they passionate about each other? And I've got a core group of women that have played on both World Cup teams that I tell them all the time that they are recreating small sided for women in the United States. Their
That's awesome.
success and people getting to know them and truthfully and mark my words, watch the growth of the MASLW.
Right.
And it's because these women have created a competitive league that people want to watch and more players want to play in,
Right.
which is great for our national team program. But they've created that. And
Right.
I think the last time I talked to them, 12 of our 14 or 15 players that played in Croatia are also now on a roster for the TST. So they are getting
Oh,
an opportunity to showcase themselves as players because of the success they've had. Just in our division in the MSLW here in the Midwest, um, there are two players from Louisville that played for us in Croatia. There are three in Columbus. There are four in Cincinnati.
right.
And the competitive nature of those games because of those players lifting their teams and teaching their teams is amazing. And then, you go to the Southwest and you've got Chihuahua and you've got Dallas with Kenny Kessler and all these players that are
Yep.
taking their success and taking it back into the league and teaching. And now you've got so many of those MASL teams that now want to put a women's team in.
Right.
And so Keith and his crew have now somewhat had to adjust and create a pathway for the women because there are so many teams and players that want to play, and there's some things we have in the works for the fall, where we're going to do more identification and create that pathway for both the men and the women. And the women, the Erin Yennies and the Kayla Dickermans and Christy Zwolskis and the twins, the Byers, they deserve a lot of the credit for the growth of this women's game. They're not just amazing players, they're amazing people. And their personalities and their passion make people want to put a team in. They make the teams want to be better. They make the players want to find an opportunity. It would not surprise me if there's a full division on the West Coast next year because there are so many players that want to play in that competitive environment.
Yeah.
And of course, I know we're going to talk about Phil because Phil is, for me, amazing. But he's already said I want to put a women's team in.
That's
There are
outstanding.
multiple MASL teams that want to do women's teams, and so I'm really excited about that part, and that is a piece that maybe 3 years ago folks might not even thought about.
Right. Um, I had uh, I had Brian Cushing and Chris Economides and Josh Auden on here last week. They were at the in Des Moines for the
Mhm.
women's finals, and they were speaking in the same way. They're very excited about what's coming up and the buzz that's going around for the women's leagues and whatnot. Talk a little bit about what went on in Des Moines.
Well, there are a lot of people that are really passionate about building the arena leagues in the environments, and Darwin is one of them. Puts on a
Right,
show,
right,
um, and I was soccer director, soccer consultant for the PASL for a couple of years, and when there were the issues with the PASL last winter, I felt like I had somewhat of a responsibility to step in and try to figure it out.
hmm
And uh, Mark Litton is salt of the earth, one of my favorite people in the world. Called him and I said,
agreed.
maybe we need to think about this as an opportunity rather than an issue that we have to solve.
hmm
And so we started talking back and forth about, how can we create a pathway for the MASL and the women by, jumping in with the MASL folks.
Right.
And Mark kind of helped me through the process. We talked to Keith and kind of had an idea, an outline of how that might work.
Mm,
Um, and then, truthfully, that's when we got the smart people involved. We got Brian Cushing and Josh involved. And from an operational perspective,
right.
Josh deserves a lot of credit for helping me through the process of getting that whole partnership done. And
Right.
then Brian deserves more credit that we could possibly give him for actually implementing those ideas into the league this year.
Very cool.
Keith, obviously, Keith is on the same page with Mark and I in that, if we can do this right, the M3 to M2 to MASL pathway,
Right.
eventually there'll be conversations about the M3 and M2 having a promotion relegation. Um, there are already 3 groups that are currently in M2 or M3 that have the plans in motion to eventually do an MASL team.
Very,
Um,
very cool.
so from a player perspective and a team perspective, and again, some of those things we have set up for the fall, they're not finalized, where we're doing coaches education and ref education and continuing that player pathway. For me, I'm pretty passionate because I was one of those players that probably didn't deserve
Right.
the opportunity and George provided it.
Right.
So, I'm pretty passionate about if there's a player in M3 or M2 that has the potential to be that good, I want them to have a pathway to get there.
Yep.
Um, and so, Des Moines was kind of the culmination, so to speak, of all of these ideas and partnerships, and then to actually see the talent on the field. But also, I told the players that were there, I want them to see that environment, but I also want them to see how much further they can take this. Not
Right.
just the number of teams, but the level. There are still
Right.
when Frank did his King's Cup and had some of those women that
Yeah.
played,
Yeah.
incredibly talented women playing against men, right?
Yep.
And I can remember I probably made him mad, but I told him in the locker room, I said, if we did a national team training camp right now, I most likely wouldn't invite any of you. And they looked at me and I
Mhm.
think they were a little upset. And I said, it's not because of your talent, it's because you don't know and understand the game yet. This is why we need to get a division out here that's competitive and get a coach that can teach you because you have the talent to make up half of our roster in training camp. And
Right.
so there's always the motivation for continuing to develop players and teams to to make the national team program more competitive because those other countries are catching up. So what are we going to do to continue to develop our players? The league is central to that. The growth of the league is central to that. The educational piece is central to that, but more so than that, competitive games. To see Darwin and Brian and Josh create that competitive environment is a big piece, and those two are absolutely amazing. And watch the growth of the league.
Yeah, and you're mentioning a lot of people that first off, you mentioned the King's Cup. Now, that was the opportunity that I had to actually sit down with you and meet you for the first time. And one of the things that I was sort of amazed by, you're speaking about the women's team. There was the co-ed team that was playing at the King's Cup, and I mean, they didn't do all that well on the scoreboard, but one of the men on on that team, Bryce Watson,
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
got a contract. He actually got a
yeah,
contract for the Empire Strikers.
yeah. I was out. I think that was.
So
I went out for maybe pre-training camp with the Strikers to help a little bit, and then went back later in the season to help a little bit when Paul called. And you're right, Bryce had an opportunity and took advantage of it. And again, credit to Frank for providing that opportunity, not just for guys to
sure,
play. It's a really fun event. I love watching. I go out every year to help
yeah,
Frank in whatever way I can. But for
right.
somebody like Bryce, what an opportunity.
No, absolutely, and he's shown himself on the field with the in the first division. It's been a really good opportunity, and he's actually shown himself to play well and be able to. And he's not a very big guy, He's out there wrestling with everybody. I lost your image. I've lost I've lost Craig Rhodis's picture, and it sounds like I might have lost his audio as well. Um, yeah, we're gonna when he gets back up, we're gonna talk a little bit about the World Mini Football, the World Cups that have taken place. There he is. There he is. Yeah. So I was just saying that one of the things I want to cover with you is the World Cup, or the Mini Football World Cup. You first got involved when the team traveled to Australia.
Yeah. Um, I've been involved in the small sided stuff, but I had a chance to play with Bernie for a few different teams, and back then Bernie was a general manager of our mini football, and
Right.
Phil and I had coached against each other in the PSL Pro back in the day,
Right. Right.
and Kevin Milliken, who was the commissioner of the PSL at the time, obviously I've known for years, and they invited me to be an assistant coach, and we went
Nice.
to Perth, and I got to tell you, I was hooked. I was hooked.
Uh-huh.
And so, after that event, I think they asked me to do the women's team for Ukraine, and
Okay.
had a chance to prepare that team and coach that team. And they were absolutely amazing in Ukraine. And then, kind of after the women won that World Cup, moved into more of a technical director position.
Okay.
Um, and, for this last men's World Cup in Dubai, kind of helped Phil form the roster and was an assistant coach and helped Phil in whatever capacity I could. Um, and then obviously our women last October went to Croatia and won that World Cup again.
Two in a
And
row.
now we're hot and heavy into preparation and roster selection for Azerbaijan, which is the end of May.
Right. And I mean, it's right around the corner. I mean,
It is.
literally right around the corner. And so let's just sort of run down it pretty quick. The United States won the very first World Cup in 2015. That was held here in the United States with boards in that format, in the regular indoor format. So as you were saying a minute ago, it really probably comes as not really a big surprise that the United States would win that. It was done differently. I remember it was done differently. They tried to do it sort of like the FIFA World Cup, where they had a number of different venues and the teams traveled around the country and played in different locations around the country. Well, whereas since then, wherever it's been hosted, it's been on a single field where everybody's playing on the same field. And then
I, I,
talk.
I wish people had the opportunity to travel to one of these World Cups. Um,
Right,
because they spend so much money on these stadiums. And in Dubai, it's right on the water, and they've got events all around the stadium. And, our hotel has our own cafeteria and practice field, and it's amazing. and the World Mini Football Federation has grown to the point where
Yep.
even participating in a World Cup is so competitive. Um, People would think that Azerbaijan is not the ideal place to host a World Cup, but from the amount of money and time and effort they're investing into that event, my expectation is it's going to be far better than even Dubai. Um, and truthfully, the women's is catching up. Obviously, there's not as many countries that
Right.
participate as the men, but the competitive nature and the event that they run, like I said, I wish people had the opportunity to travel to see these events because, for example, the women when they won the final against Mexico and Croatia, the crowds chanting USA, and the women are soaking it up, and Ian Bennett's dancing on the field, and I mean,
Wow.
just the environment is wonderful.
Oh my goodness. And there are some pretty strong teams around the world. You're talking about, how they play this frequently. The game is they're familiar with the seven-a-side, rather the six-a-side format without the boards, and they play it frequently. Czech Republic has had some success. Romania has had some success. Got to mention Mexico. I mean, Mexico won 1 year and was the runner-up the previous 2 years. So they had a great run there under Rene Ortiz. But there's a lot of interest in this sport. Um, the World Cup has the last time they fielded 32 teams. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's 32 this time too, and not everybody qualified. Um, and if it tells you anything, right now we're seated number 17.
My goodness.
So
Okay.
for me personally, I use that as motivation, and I tell the
Yep.
players this all the time. But every event that we do, I feel like I learn something, about how we want to play, or what kind of roster we want to select, or what kind of player we're looking for, and it's just a passion. I think the players feel the same. I try not to bother the players that we've invited at this point to the World Cup because I want them to focus on the playoffs.
Right.
But occasionally I'll get a note from some of those players, that looked at the brackets, or, are talking about pre-event training camp, and I try to ignore them and let them focus on the playoffs just out of respect for, the process.
Speaking of the brackets, I was looking at it, and forgive me, I didn't put it to my memory. But what are the other three teams the United States is in group play with?
Um, Poland is one, who I think will be pretty good. I'd have to look back. The who was I talking to? I think I was talking to Paul Savage, who is our medical guru for these trips. And, he was a little upset about the bracket and, where it led to. And, maybe I'm a little different, but, I feel like if we're prepared and we have the right roster, and obviously you have to catch a little luck, but, for me, you're going to play good teams regardless. There's no
Right.
easy game in the World Cup. So the bracket, yeah, maybe it's important, and it is a little motivation for us being as low a seed as we are. But the
Yeah.
reality is we're going to have to play good teams, and we're going to have to play well, and we're going to have to catch a little luck. But um, since I've been involved, we have not made it past the round of 16. So, in my head, that's the motivation. We haven't had a ton of
Absolutely.
success,
Right.
and the excuse of we don't play this format, and they've got a ton more experience, and
No.
for me that's I won't
No.
say it's irrelevant, but it,
Right.
it, it doesn't factor in. We're good enough, and
Right.
and I think that there was a lot of disappointment after Dubai. And I think that disappointment
Mm.
comes from we had some success. Like we went to that mini football event in Slovakia, and we beat three
Yes.
of the top 8 teams in the world.
Yes.
And so those players had a taste of success. And then we went to Mexico. Now it was an arena format, but it's the first time a U.S. men's team of any format has won in Mexico, and we beat Mexico in Mexico. And so
Right.
another taste of success. And then
Right.
to follow that up by getting to Dubai, and we had a very tough bracket, but to not advance, I think that's a major disappointment. I think the core players will use that as motivation.
I'm looking at the group. It's Group F. The United States is in Group F with Kazakhstan and Bosnia Herzegovina, along with Poland. So, and I'm looking at for those that are interested, the Mexico is in Group E with Montenegro, Thailand, and Costa Rica. So, I mean, this literally is the World Cup. there's teams from all around the world. I mean, lots of them from I mean, Israel, Ghana, India, obviously lots from Costa Rica. I mentioned a minute ago.
And
Obviously,
watch out for the host, Azerbaijan. They're very good. They're very good.
yeah. In fact, they had like a bronze or a silver or something in one of the previously. They were on the podium
Yep,
recently at one of the
very
World
good
Cup.
team. I mean, in my opinion, there are probably 7 countries that have a legitimate chance to win the World Cup, maybe 8. I mean, there are that many countries that are really good teams that have a ton of experience, and you know, w- whether it's win or lose, we do have the experience of playing against those teams, and so
Right.
now it's a matter of preparation. Now it's a matter of playing well. Now it's a matter of understanding what we do really, really well and what, we need to get better at. We don't have the luxury because of the MASL season to do a ton pre-event. We're going to do a pre-event training camp, but um, I think the friendly games that we do against Brazil or Mexico in the arenas, yes, you're 100% correct that it's with boards, and so you could argue that there's not a ton of benefit, but
Right.
it's still a competitive game. It's still an opportunity to identify players, and we've
Right.
done a relatively good job of consistently inviting new players to see how they do in that format. For
Well,
example, the game that Phil put on in California was the first call up for Alvarez from Milwaukee
right.
and did extremely well. And now look at the year he's had for Milwaukee this year.
Yeah.
So we've done a relatively good job of trying to find opportunities for new players and throwing them in and see how they do.
Well, and by even though it is an arena format, figuring out the chemistry that the different players have with each other that don't typically play together, in fact, frequently play against one another, and finding that chemistry is super important from the coach's perspective.
It is, and again, personality is a big piece in roster selection for me.
Yeah.
Um, I it's harder and harder with this next generation. I call them I players.
Okay.
It's what their individual benefit is.
Right.
Um, and it's a mixture of some experience with some new and very talented faces, and you'll see that when the roster comes out that we identify talent and personality, experience factors in, how they relate to other players, how they fit as far as positional need. Do they give us, and maybe this was a mistake we made in Dubai, because I don't know that in our roster selection we had a ton of flexibility in how we wanted to play. And
Oh,
so when we needed to play a different way based upon what the other team, was causing as far as problems. So, the flexibility in allowing, a change in style a little bit. I mean, obviously you don't want to veer away from what you do really, really well. But there are times where the other team throws something in that you have to be ready for, and you have to have the roster to be able to do that. So yeah, it's a process to select a roster. But the other thing that you factor in is form. There are some guys that have been key players in the past, but they're injured or haven't had the year that you think they're going to have, and so
Right.
their form, how they're playing now currently, also factors in. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth.
Yeah. Will you be coming to San Diego for the playoffs this weekend?
I am. Yes, there are some conversations I need to have, and want to do a final watch, so to speak, on some of the players because you're not going to find a more competitive format than neutral field, 8 teams.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean the the thought process is let's see them one more time in the most competitive format.
Right.
And that'll help solidify some of the selections. And obviously, the staff that I use to select will be out there, and we can have those conversations.
How quickly after the conclusion of the MASL playoffs, because obviously it's not over with when here in San Diego the two remaining teams are going to have a championship series, but how soon after that are you going to pull out the players and start getting together and putting them together for the
We've
World
done
Cup?
some of it. We've done some invitations already, and I would say that shortly thereafter it'll be announced publicly.
Okay,
I want to be very respectful of the playoff format and
right,
allow their focus to be the only thing on their mind is the playoffs. But
absolutely,
shortly thereafter, we will make a public announcement because, just from a logistical perspective, travel to Azerbaijan is not easy. And the other thing you have to factor in is a lot of these guys are going to go directly from Azerbaijan to the TST.
right. That's right. I was just going to ask you about the travel, because so many of these countries that are playing that are going to be on the field are relatively local, even as far out as Azerbaijan is. Even the European countries don't have that much of a travel relative to what the United States and Mexico have to do from North America. How early before the World Cup starts are you guys planning on being on the ground there?
Well, and again, learning lesson, but travel to Europe in general is not easy.
Right.
Generally speaking, there's a time change that you want your players to have a little bit of time to adapt to. Um, so, the focus is, trying to get there early enough to do your pre-event training camp on the ground where you're playing.
Right.
Sometimes that's just not feasible because of travel.
Right.
Again, going back to the women in Croatia, um, the women are just amazing. But if you think about it,
Hmm.
they flew from the United States and into Croatia, and then the event was on a wonderful island, but you had to take a ferry. It was a
Well,
3 hour ferry. So the amount of travel and logistics that were required for that event, once you get on the ground, they've got transportation and meals and practice fields and everything is wonderful. But
yeah.
the actual getting to and from can be a challenge at times for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I recall in 2019, the Mexico team, about half of their players didn't show up until like either the day of or the day before they were supposed to take the field. So there was, I mean, when you're traveling halfway around the world, literally, um, that the logistics is insane. I mean, I was in the travel industry for a number of years, and I traveled around the world frequently, and it was interesting to me because going heading east for me was actually a little easier than heading long distances west as far as the time change was concerned. So getting to Europe arriving in Europe was interesting for me. I figured the way to avoid the jet lag was just stay awake once you arrive. If you arrive in the morning, just force yourself to stay awake until it's a regular hour to go to sleep, 9 o'clock in the evening or 8 o'clock in the evening. Although that makes that day kind of tough. You wake up the next morning and you're pretty much back in sync, pretty much right away. Do you have any set
You know what,
circumstances.
Greg? There are two lessons I've learned, and one is, I guess I would say, control the controllables. There are some things beyond your control,
Right,
and don't focus on them.
right,
Because you focus on them, you lose sight of what your major goals are. And second, always find the staff that are far more organized and thinking about the little things than you are. And so, like Paul Savage is, he doesn't get enough credit. He's far more than an athletic trainer. In fact, I talked to him the
right.
other day on the phone, and he's already got ideas and plans. Uh, and when we went to Croatia, I took my wonderful wife of 20 years and said, "Hey, you're going to be part of the staff, and you're going to make sure the girls are taken care of. You're going to be the link between the girls and myself." I took an amazing coaching staff that allowed me to focus on the team, and they focused on the positional needs. The girls called Ian their hype man because he was the energy. Frank, who's a quiet guy, but when he does speak, it
Right,
has a significance. And
right,
then Uzi, I allowed Uzi just to take the defenders and coach them up, and it allowed me to scout the other teams, prepare a game plan, do video analysis. And so what I've learned is get the help that's better than you are, that are more organized than you are, and it allows you
right.
to focus on the things that are most important. And truthfully, I can tell you without a doubt, going to Azerbaijan, there are going to be hiccups,
Right.
and you can't focus on them. You deal with them and focus on the important stuff.
Well, I'm going to let you go. Craig, thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you here in a few days in San Diego.
I'll make sure I
Um,
catch up with you.
yeah, that'll be great. I'll be there probably. I think the only game I'm going to miss is possibly the early game on Friday.
Okay.
Um, but I should be there for the rest of them. And look forward to talking with you there. And then the World Cup is super exciting. I'm really excited about it every time it shows up. I fell in love with the format when it was here in the United States, and of course, I haven't been able to take it in live with all the exotic destinations: Tunisia, Australia, Kiev. I mean, the whole thing. So, but it's super exciting to have you and get a chance to talk to you. One of the things that you're saying here just now about staff, it's super super important. A couple of things. One is the leadership ability to delegate, and the other is the leadership ability to pick those people that you can delegate to, and they'll take care of the business without you having to micromanage the entire operation. So I'm really stoked about hearing that you're looking into that and doing that and keeping that going. Thanks very much, Craig, for joining me today, buddy.
No problem. I'll see you in a couple of days. Thank you.
All right, bye bye. Thanks everybody for watching. Craig Rhodis, what a guy. So it's going to be pretty fun. What's coming.